met her in the fall. He took her to a movie, and when they done it all, he took her to a movie.
Hello and welcome to the Fabulous Picture Show. I'm Amanda Palmer. This week we're screening W by legendary director Oliver Stone. And we'll be joined by the man himself a little later. He'll be taking questions from our audience.
I like the way you think.
W is the story of a really likeable guy
And look.
who became one of history's most despised presidents.
All right, way to go.
Oliver Stone has been called an anti-American conspiracy nut
God, I'm ashamed to be an American today.
and a purveyor of violence. But on this Oliver Stone special, we learn that now he's employing the dead.
John Wayne works for me as a screen actor.
Oliver Stone was a 40-year-old Oscar-winning screenwriter when he wrote and directed the film that made him famous. It was based on his own experiences as a privileged 20-year-old who volunteered to serve in Vietnam.
You did what? I volunteered. I dropped out of college and told him I wanted the infantry, combat, Vietnam.
Oliver Stone and George W. Bush were both at Yale, class of '68, when Stone dropped out and enlisted as a grunt in the infantry.
You okay?
You lived in a fairly elite world in your youth.
We were very privileged. Unlike Bush, there was no inheritance to be had. I mean, it was just basically on my own after college.
His father wanted him to stay in school. Oliver made a decision to join the military. He didn't have to. I know that he was wounded, and I knew that he saw quite a bit of heavy combat.
When his tour ended, Stone went to film school and eventually established himself as a top screenwriter, winning an Oscar for Midnight Express.
Get down.
He wrote Scarface for Brian De Palma about a Cuban deportee,
I'm Tony Montana, a political prisoner from Cuba.
making his way in the land of opportunity. After directing the fiercely political Salvador, he finally got to direct his dream project and do a cameo in Platoon.
Okay, get 2 squads from Alpha down there right away. Go, go.
It won 4 Oscars, including Best Director and Best Picture.
Oliver Stone really did tap into a national moment where America got over its embarrassment with the Vietnam War. They wanted to re-embrace the veterans because there was a realization of what sacrifices they had made.
A few years later, Stone would revisit the Vietnam War and win a second Best Director Oscar.
To say that this war is wrong, that this society lied to me, it lied to my brothers.
We wanted them to understand what it meant to come home wounded from that war. Hopefully, it awakened a lot of people to the human cost of not only that war, but universally speaking, the human cost of war in general.
And in between, he made another film that nailed the American zeitgeist.
You win a few, you lose a few, but you keep on fighting. And if you need a friend, get a dog.
You don't want to do another Wall Street. You don't want to do the sequel.
I don't really, not yet. I mean, not now. I had to say what I had to say. I'm not an expert either. My father was in Wall Street for 35 years, and I loved him, and I wanted to give an homage to my dad, and it was another Wall Street, and I came on it at a moment in which it was changing. I was shocked. In my dad's day, kids who were in their 20s and 30s could not make $1 million like that. All of a sudden, in the 1980s, punks were making money and laughing about it. It was like Scarface time on Wall Street. They were all doing coke. It was great, but it was insane.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
On a roll, Stone made what many consider his signature work, JFK.
If I were investigating the case, I'd round up 100 of the world's best riflemen.
Oliver Stone's directorial style is all about hitting the big moments, and in the story of JFK, you've got all these landmark moments in American history, each of which is kind of aimed at you like a gunshot.
We're closer than you think.
JFK argues that Kennedy was killed not by a lone gunman.
I think Oswald was a good old-fashioned decoy.
But by assassins working for the military-industrial complex.
The Warren Commission has been a joke to people who really pay attention. One day, hopefully, science will find a way to prove that, not that I'm right, but that Oswald did not do this thing.
I love you, Mickey.
You, Mallory.
In his experimental satire on violence in the American media, Stone brought us Mickey and Mallory, 2 cute kids.
I love Mickey and the Marilyn. They're so
who happen to be natural-born killers.
Natural-born killers kind of caused a backlash against Oliver Stone because of its outlandish violence. But in fact, if you look at it again, you'll see that it's a kind of comic book story.
Compared to the success of JFK, Stone's Nixon biopic was a major disappointment. He may look happy, but after the financial failure of Nixon and the tepid critical response to Any Given Sunday, Stone decided it was time for a change. Defying the long-standing American ban on travel to Cuba, Oliver Stone got on a plane to Havana to meet El Comandante. Stone spent 3 days with Castro shooting a candid guerrilla-style documentary.
Puedo asegurar que en 43 años de revolución, jamás en este país se ha torturado.
I want to take you from 1999, where you turned to factual filmmaking. You're exhausted, and then you take on a subject about Fidel Castro.
When I'm doing a documentary, I am really a documentarian at that point, but I did say to Castro very clearly, look, the rules of engagement here for me is I'm the director and you're the actor. Has he ever felt or that he wanted to talk to a psychiatrist? If you go on too long, I'm going to cut you. I honestly said that to him, and he laughed because he had a reputation for prolixity. And I did cut him a few times. I said, look, Fidel, let's move on. This is boring.
Were you decorated for being in Vietnam? Sí, sí, he recibido condecoraciones por estar en Vietnam.
Whatever chemistry there is in the Comandante is because I did treat him as an equal.
The Cuban Revolution drove out one dictator, but it produced another, Fidel Castro.
I think he's been demonized to death on American television. If there's anything Orwellian about the situation, it's an example of creating a demon who is 10 times bigger. I went to puncture the demon. I said, okay, who is Fidel?
A que desde muy pequeño tuve que resolver importantes problemas.
In 2003, after Castro ordered the execution of 3 Cubans who tried to hijack a ferry to America, Stone's Comandante was pulled by American network HBO.
It was frustrating beyond belief. I was very upset, and it went under the American media radar. There was no condemnation of that action, partly because Castro is a public enemy in America.
Despite shelving Comandante, HBO sent Stone back for a sequel.
Yo no ejecuté a nadie, estoy en desacuerdo con la terminología.
Challenging Castro on his draconian execution of the ferry hijackers and his jailing of dissidents.
If Mr. Arafat theoretically says there's a ceasefire tomorrow and Hamas blows up 3 or 4 places, they will ruin that ceasefire. And that's happened before.
حماس تتحرك وفق مصلحة الشعب الفلسطيني.
To the interest of the Palestinian people.
Persona non grata. When you made that film, is that you trying to get the human face for America?
Yeah, very much so. We went to Palestine. We were hardly scholars. We were a filmmaking crew. We wanted to talk to the Israelis on one side. We got to the right wing, Netanyahu, and we went to the West Bank, and we're in Ramallah the day that the Israelis attacked. We barely got our interview in, but we had a little time, but it was very tricky.
In Persona non grata, Stone delves into the Middle Eastern morass.
The Middle East is full of tonks and show-to-feels.
Most of the rational voices in that film were Israeli voices, charismatic Israeli leaders speaking out of what they think is going on there. While the Palestinian narrative is presented by almost caricaturial type characters. And of course, Arafat is never seen but shaking hands and kissing kids.
I'm following up your story, because now it's a private meeting.
That's enough. Now, having said that, it's yet far more progressive, far more advanced than most other films and documentaries we've seen on Israel-Palestine.
We got last time, 6 months ago, around 60 M16s and around, 5 million bullets from the security guard of Sharon.
We met a real hard-ass terrorist group called Al-Aqsa.
Talking about how much an M16 costs, there's a moment it was totally surreal.
This M16, it costs $5,000.
$5,000's a lot.
Yeah,
but they charge you.
It's very expensive.
A lot of corruption in the world, you see. It's not us against them, black against white, like Mr. Bush thinks. It's a very gray world.
We're in an age where filmmakers, they've had a terrible year in America last year, making any film that even went near Iraq.
Yes.
You've always said you had a responsibility with Platoon. Certainly you dedicated that to the veterans of Vietnam. It wasn't just autobiographical, it was for them as well. It was a homage to them. Who's going to have the guts to do a film about the casualties and the realities of what's happening there, if you're not going to?
Oh, come on, now you're laying some guilt on me. Okay, you talk about me going back to the ground, I'd have to deal with the American GI thing also, and I've been there. It's so hard for me to go back to the nature of war. I'm 62 years old. I don't want to go and repeat that. I have to find my own truth and my freshness to it.
I figured why should just the poor kids go off to war and the rich kids always get away with it?
Oh, I see. What we got here is a crusader.
We're about to screen W, and in part 2 we'll have a Q&A and we'll be joined by Oliver Stone.
He met her in